what point or period of history do you find most fascinating?
The High Middle Ages, so like around the Crusades, as well as colonial America.
And why the
Basically,
High Middle Ages?
it's just a super dramatic era. You've got Vikings, Mongols, Knights, and you've just got so much going on. It's I don't know how to describe it. It's like the era of history in which the major world civilizations were like the most extreme you're going to get. So in the modern world, like you have I feel like industrial society has made people more and more similar, but in the Middle Ages you have like medieval crusader knights going against like Mamelukes, and they're so different, and there's so much. It's just so badass. To be fair, it feels like a fantasy novel. Or you'll have like Vikings going up against Mongols, and these are just two really badass peoples from entirely different trajectories, and they're just going at each other.
Entirely different worldviews. They may as well be aliens to each
Yeah,
other when they meet.
yeah,
Yeah, that is
yeah.
fascinating. So, did the Mongols ever cross the Vikings?
They didn't cross the Vikings per se. They crossed descendants of the Vikings and the Rus.
No.
But you do have peoples like the Mongols who the Vikings crossed. So the Vikings in Russia beat the Cumans, they beat the Magyars, and they beat the Pechenegs. So the tribes from like from like Ukraine, like southern Russia, they were pretty similar to the Mongols, but like less well organized.
Like still nomadic sort of Hun types from the
Yeah,
steppe.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. What is something that has had a disproportionate impact on the world that basically no one knows about?
There's a lot of answers for that. The one that's off the top of my head is Al-Ghazali's shift in Islam. I've talked a lot about it in Whatifalthist, where
Yeah,
in the
that's a
11th,
great one.
so by the 11th century, Islam was the wealthiest, most technologically advanced civilization in the world, and they developed this thing called Mutazila free will, which is basically that by studying the outside world, you are finding God, and there's lots of interpretations you can use for God, and that God is rational, and so it was a path that was leading towards science, basically. And then Al-Ghazali pushed against that entire trajectory, and Al-Ghazali said that God's inherently irrational. God can change the world at any time, and that studying the outside world's dumb because if God can change things, the only thing that matters is the Quran. And so that basically put Islamic civilization on a trajectory against science. And you just see Islamic science collapse after that. I mean, Islamic countries banned the printing press, they banned scientific debate, they put less funding into universities, all that stuff.
And just for people playing along at home, what was the century there, and what was the name of this man?
It's the 11th century, and it's Al-Ghazali. It's interesting. Islamic civilization started to decay exactly when the West started to take off, like 1000 AD.
Because I remember, it's funny you bring that up, just super coincidentally.
Yeah, yeah,
Because today I published my podcast that I did with Jack
yeah,
Weatherford, who authored
yeah,
Genghis Khan and the Making of the Modern World. And
yeah,
one
yeah.
of the big questions I had in there was, there's a narrative that the Mongols, and
Yes,
specifically Genghis Khan's Mongols, when they
yeah,
sacked the Islamic world, they essentially reset
yeah,
the Islamic world. And so that was the idea that I had. And then when I asked Jack the question, he answered, well, no, that's actually not the case. It was about 100 or
yeah,
200 years before, which puts him in the 11th
yeah,
century, when they had already
yeah,
destroyed themselves. And what the Mongols
yeah,
actually did was essentially maybe even slow down their self-destruction by burning it all to the
yeah,
ground, more or less.
yeah,
Yeah, that
yeah,
fascinating bit of history there, the High Middle
yeah.
Ages.
Yeah. It's really interesting. China had the exact same trajectory at the exact same time, and I can't really tell you why. China was also really technologically advanced, but they also started to hurt themselves around 1000 AD, where China was going to have an industrial revolution. They had iron kilns and iron production and gunpowder and all that stuff, and then they just bureaucrated all of that out of existence. So they never used gunpowder, although they figured out how to. I mean, they had massive explosives and
Mm-hmm.
guns and all that stuff. Never used it. They had the Industrial Revolution, but then their bureaucrats basically designed the tax and regulation structure so that no entrepreneur would do it. The three inventions that supposedly made the modern world, the printing press, the gunpowder, and the compass, were all invented in China, and the Chinese didn't use them.
Wild, eh? The Chinese have
Yeah,
they've got
exactly.
some remarkable inventions, like
Yeah.
paper as well. I think, right?
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
paper. Yeah,
yeah.
it's. I once heard a joke saying the Museum of Chinese Science History is about how the Chinese invented the time machine so no one else would ever.
Give us one more if you can. We've got Al Ghazali, the Chinese.
Oh, civilizations that self imploded.
Not not
Um,
not not that necessarily, but something that has had a huge impact on our
oh,
life
okay.
that we've never really heard of.
Um, wow. Um, I would probably. Oh, there. This is one of those. This is another medieval thing, which is my speciality. It's the Spanish government's policy of when it conquered the Muslims. So you had Christian kingdoms in the north. Christian kingdoms conquered the south of Spain, which was Muslim. And when the Christians colonized the south, they decided to evict the local Muslim smallholders and basically get rid of the town and get rid of the town organization, replace it with basically like sheep pastures with northern ranchers, and that had the effect of basically really weakening like Spain's economy and turning Spain into what amounted to a third world country. Of they have sheep and then they trade the sheep to the Netherlands, and then the Netherlands sends them finished goods back. That doesn't sound important, but what ended up happening was it kind of really slowed down Spain's economic development, prevented Spain from becoming a more and more modern society. Then Spain exported that to Latin America, and then it became way more extreme because colonial societies tend to be more extreme versions of their home countries. So if you had seen Spain go on an economic trajectory like France, you would have seen Latin America turn out like America.
No, very interesting. You
Yeah,
say the colony ends up being more extreme versions of the country
yeah,
itself. I was just
yeah,
listening to Jared Diamond's book Upheaval, and he has a
yeah.
chapter
Yeah.
on
I'm
Australia.
listening to that now.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
fantastic, isn't it? But he has a chapter on Australia, in
yeah,
which for those listening, they might hear that
yeah,
I'm an Australian, and he commented that
yeah,
when people went there in the early 19th century,
yeah,
they would comment that it's England 100 years ago almost, and so
yeah,
Australia for this period of time was the most English place in the world you could be. It's just such
yeah.
a bizarre thing to think about.
Yeah, actually I have more to say on that. Where like a lot of I'll talk about America and Australia, but a lot of Australian culture is stuff Britain carried out in 1840. So I've never been to Australia, but I've heard Australia is really big on like fairness. There's like more class. There's like more thinking about class than the other British like offshoot societies. There's like a certain sense of like rugged masculinity, and like there's a big and I wrote something on this sort of for a bit, but those were all things that were really big in 1840s Britain, where 1840s Britain was really unfair. Like class divisions were kind of tearing it apart, and it was like Britain was going out and colonizing all this stuff. So like the kind of Australian attitude of like going out to the outback and like being manly men and stuff, that was part of the British Empire at the time. And if you look at America, America's known for being gun nuts, religious fanatics, and hyper capitalist, and that's what Britain was in the 1600s. The British were known for basically being like the hyper-capitalist pirates of the European world at the time. And Britain was also going through religious fanaticism, and like Britain in the 16th, 17th century killed the king and had a republic. And so a lot of the American Revolution was the values of 17th century Britain going up against the values of 18th century Britain.
What
Yeah.
part of history would you go back to see? No, what part of history would you go back to see what it was like if you could?
Yeah. I'd go back to the Middle Ages, of course, my favorite era. I wouldn't live in the Middle Ages. That sounds like it would get depressing and
Yeah,
boring fast. But if I had to live anywhere, it would be like 18th or 19th century America. But it would be, yeah, Middle Ages. I just love to see how it worked.
Would you? What specific sort of region would you go to? Because this question is almost like you can't just
Yeah.
teleport between places. You're entering
Yeah.
the
Okay.
life, you know. And you can
Okay.
be
So,
a high aristocrat if you like, but nonetheless,
yeah.
you're in the life.
Okay. I'd be an aristocrat. So, okay. I speak French and I speak incredibly poor Latin. So I'd probably go back to like medieval France and then just try to beef up my French skills and be an aristocrat.
Okay, nice. And then just move through the interesting world, man. It would be so
Yeah.
fascinating, wouldn't it? But maybe there is this thing which I think about sometimes is it
Yeah.
might be the case that we just over romanticize things in the past, and it's almost an extension.
Yeah.
The grass always been greener on the other side, because
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
whether you fully buy into the Steven Pinker model of the world, or if you think differently
Yeah.
about it and buy into like the Chris Ryan model of the world, basically you can. It's pretty hard to argue against the idea that we actually do live in the
Yeah.
greatest moment ever
Yeah.
of civilization.
Yeah.
Even if you go back to the height of the Roman Empire, the height of the Greek Empire, the height of the Egyptian
Yeah.
Empire, like we do live really in the best time in history, and so
Yeah.
it's fun to romanticize like, oh, I wish I could go back and be in this time or this time,
Yeah.
but I think maybe it's only because you know what happens after, to actually be in it, and to not be able to
Yeah.
with redacted view. It might actually be fucking tough, and maybe not as exciting as you think.
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree with that. Where, like, I mean, the biggest thing people don't talk about when they think of the past is disease. Where disease rates were absolutely horrifying in the past, and I mean, lots of people like go to places like India or like Brazil and stuff, and then they get like hurt, they get really sick. If you were to go back to the Middle Ages, that would be way worse.
Mm-hmm.
And
Salmonella.
I mean,
everything has salmonella.
Exactly, and so. Yeah, we are in the best era of history for the whole world. I mean, if you're like, oh, like a white male, if you're a white male, like working class, if you're a working class white male, then like the 1970s or like 70s is probably the best year to be alive. But if you're for the entire world's population, it's definitely the present, because you've seen massive economic growth around the world. Like, so over 1 billion people have been lifted out of poverty in the last 20 years, and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, no, we truly do. Beyond just the idea of being a white male in maybe the 70s or 80s, is
Yeah.
it's you know,
Yeah.
it's much bigger than like a Western centric look at it as well.
Yeah.
Ultimately, just having access to the internet, which COVID
Yeah.
has proven over the last year, has opened up
Yeah.
economic opportunity like you've never seen before. You know, like
Yeah.
with my business, we just use Fiverr, and I've got a bunch of Nigerian guys working for me who are getting paid way better than if they had been working in Nigeria.
Yeah.
They're doing work according to their own time, work in their own home, work that's building up their skills. It's like on every objective measure, they are getting better, and it's only because of the access to technology. And even 10 years ago, that wouldn't have been possible. And it's like, so it truly is international. What it's doing, I hope, is what the internet will do is liberate people from any sort of dependency on a state or geographically where they are, because it is the case that you just sometimes fucking dealt a bad hand, and you're born into a poor village in a poor country. But as soon as you get access to the internet and maybe just a few lucky serendipitous moments of life, maybe you can move to the big city. Bam, life's changed, and there's no other period in history where that was possible.
Yeah, I really agree with that. Where, like, I would not be able to do this job in any other era of history, because the internet allows me to aggregate people from around the world who have really niche interests and make money off it, and that could not have happened. Like imagine 100 years ago I was trying to do this, I would have to like write newspaper columns, and then it wouldn't get around anywhere except my small area or like my country, and then there wouldn't be enough people who would reading and cared enough, and it's just a terrible system.
Yeah,
it really annoys me when people talk about like when like Nike opens a factory in like Bangladesh, and then the fact of paying them less than American labor is seen as exploitation, because that's the reason they're there in the first place, and they're getting wages that are higher than anything else in their country.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, that is totally true. It's a pretty stupid economic argument to say, why aren't you paying them the same as the US? But you definitely also can't discount the fact that more exploitation happens in these countries.
Of course,
You have to always look at what the ultimate incentive is. And if Nike's going there just because they get the cheapest labor rates, it's like, okay, good. Well, what else are they doing to cut the cheapest cost that they can possibly?
Yeah.
But that is like
and
totally unrelated.
Yeah, and it's really terrible when let's not go off on a weird tangent here, but it's really terrible when, I think the worst is when they hire subcontractors who don't really have any oversight, and then they'll create like terrible oppressive work communities.
Oh, 100%, mate. I mean, look, you're really tapping into something that's top of mind for me at the moment. I'm thinking a lot about special economic zones, and I'm thinking a lot about the supply chains for these massive companies. I interviewed Dan McDougall during the week, who has a super decorated career in foreign journalism. And, you know, anyone who's playing along at home, just Dan McDougall into Google, and you'll see what he's written. truly remarkable stuff.
Oh yeah.
But like you say, you hire out a contractor who takes care of one part of the supply chain, and all of a sudden their oversight isn't being taken accounted for. Just buy a Nestle chocolate bar. One of them is organic, one of them is not. One of them is like labor certified, one of them is not. They come from the same place, you know, but like they have the fucking arrogance to say to you, no, this one we took care of the labor. This one we didn't give a fuck. We cut every cost that we could. But they come from the exact same place, and you know where it's from as well. You know, like vanilla is exclusively grown in Madagascar. Man, the sort of crime and underground networks that runs the vanilla trade in Madagascar is so bad. You know, it's exploitation at every level. Yet, but yes, that is a weird tangent to go down. One which would be fun, but maybe another time.